And the referee again checking his watch. And there it goes! The final whistle!
Carlo Corazon will wait inside the box for this from Martinet. And a header on it there, and that might have been it. That is a goal for Canada. The header was it Jason DeVos?
One last chance for Canada. Sophie Schmidt takes a deflection. Matheson is down the goal. The wins bronze for Canada.
Qualified for World Cup 86, defeating Honduras by a score of 2-1 here in St. John's, Newfoundland this afternoon.
Welcome to the Canada Soccer Nation podcast. My name is Jason DeVos. I'm the Director of Development with Canada Soccer. And as always, I'm joined by Brad Fougere, Digital and Corporate Communications Manager with Canada Soccer. Return to play is front of mind with everyone right now. And I believe every one of the member associations, provincial and territorial member associations, has now had their return to play plans approved by Canada Soccer. And they're providing access to their clubs to the Canada Soccer assessment tool, which will help those clubs assess the risk involved in the programming that they're planning to resume. So that's obviously front in mind with everyone right now, and it's been keeping everyone quite busy, Brad, over the last week or so. What else have we got on the boilerplate right now with respect to webinars and content that's coming out from Canada Soccer in the near future?
Jason, it's been a busy week. Things are busy and remain busy and will be busy forever.
I don't know if things are ever not going to be busy.
It's good,
but I think that's a good thing.
It is. It's a good thing. It's good to be busy for sure. The Canada Soccer Nation Inside webinars continue. On Saturday, June 20th, we'll have an explanation of the changes to the laws of the game, sort of part 2 version. With members of our national referee program. You can register for that at canadasoccer.com under the Canada Soccer Nation Inside banner. And poised to come will be the last of the Inside CanWNT Robin and Rian show, which we don't actually have nailed down right now, but it will be an exciting show featuring a certain international goal scoring record holder. So we'll have more details on that coming via social media, and maybe we can talk a bit about a date on next week's show.
Awesome. Now that'll be really good. I've loved listening to the Robin and Rian show and that partnership. It's blossomed. I think they've got a future in broadcasting for sure.
I think so too. Maybe they'll take over the podcast, Jason.
Maybe we'll be out of a job. So
they're great for sure.
Yeah, for sure. I talked very briefly at the start about return to play, and we're going to throw to break really quickly because we're going to get Earl Cochrane to come on and talk about that process, the return to play protocol and the process for each province and territory, what they've gone through, as well as the Canada Soccer assessment tool and some of the commonalities that we're seeing across the country from coast to coast and some of the messaging that we're reinforcing about taking things slow, not racing to get back into full games and full contact just yet, because we want to make sure it's a gradual approach. But when we come back after the break, we'll hear from that man himself, Earl Cochrane. Stay tuned. Pleased to be joined now by Earl Cochrane, Special Projects Manager at Canada Soccer. Earl, welcome to the Canada Soccer Nation podcast. We've been dealing with, over the last 3 months, since March 12th, 13th, the suspension of all sanctioned soccer activities. And we've been dealing with an eventual return to play and what that could look like. It's been a lengthy process, one where we've had countless video calls and conference calls and discussions about the right approach to take. Talk us through that process a little bit. What's that entailed from Canada Soccer's perspective with return to play?
Sure. And in many respects, this podcast feels like an extension of those calls. You, Brad, myself.
I talk to you guys more than my own family.
Absolutely. It feels like we're on these calls like 3-4 times a day. But it's 91 days, by the way. But if you're
not that you're counting. Yeah.
It's been like it's been probably in so many different markets and so many different sort of areas across our country, right? It's been a very fluid, ever-changing sort of process since we shut down on March 13th. And I think on March 14th, you probably remember the conversations we had on March 14th and the days right after it. The messaging then was the easiest thing you can do, and it was absolutely the right thing to do at the time, was to shut things down. Mm-hmm. The more difficult part is going to how we're going to to turn the tap back on, right? And so from the get-go, we were having those discussions about what a return might look like. It became very evident, I think, early on that it was going to have to be regionalized, right? The differences across the country were vast, and not even just across the country, even in provinces and territories, there were regional differences that needed to be accounted for. So we quickly started to figure out how we were going to do this regionally. We engaged, the provinces and territories early on. We've had, 30, 40 meetings over the period of 91 days talking about these things. And we eventually arrived at a place where we knew that the provincial associations were going to have to come up with their own return to play plans that spoke to the realities in their provinces and territories because of the vast differences. And we quickly realized that was probably the best approach, and certainly it was going to involve a significant amount of work to get there. But all 13 provinces and territories submitted plans to a review panel. That review panel dissected those plans, very, very detailed, pushed back some feedback to the provinces, and they made the necessary corrections. That was sort of the fourth domino that needed to kind of fall in order for the return to play or return to soccer plans to be sort of realized. And the fifth one was one that we devised internally. We had deep discussions about it and how we could perhaps not create a tool or a platform by which we were sort of green lighting or red lighting clubs, but more a tool that would allow them to sort of self-evaluate, self-assess themselves, because the plans were always for them to have their own return protocols, but we needed a way for them to basically self-analyze those plans themselves and try to figure out whether they were missing anything, whether there were bits of mitigation that they could have added to their plans. And we always felt that there was one or two bits that may have been missed, and they could absorb those one or two bits into their existing plans, that we would have helped the organizations kind of further mitigate any risks that they had.
That tool, the assessment tool, is a valuable one for clubs across the country to use before they resume programming. What's the process, though, if a club comes back with an assessment that's moderate or high risk? What's the process then? What's the communication protocol from Canada Soccer's perspective to those organizations?
Yeah, it's a great question, because I think while it's not an approval tool, right? It's more self-evaluation. We do think there's a responsibility there to have a conversation with organizations to help guide them as they go through that tool. In many respects, the score, for lack of a better word, that you get at the back end of it is in many respects determined by the risk you have on the ground in your communities and in your provinces and territories. So again, that varies right across the country. But I think we had 6 to 7 very key risk factors. In some provinces, there were 2. In others, perhaps the provinces that are a little further down the line, they added 4 to those. So in some regards, the level of mitigation that you placed against those risks ended up spitting out your assessment score. And the problem, and the clubs and the organizations that landed in that moderate category, we reach out to. We send a quick email back, making sure that they didn't make any mistakes going through the process, they didn't misidentify things, but then highlight areas that we think that they might be able to sort of further mitigate, areas that they may not even have thought about. It's divided into, I think, about 6 or 7 key sort of areas, right? And they're in those who are familiar with sort of risk management and emergency preparedness planning. They're all sort of normal buckets of information, right? We wanted to make sure that they had a firm understanding of COVID-19, that they had thought deeply about what an emergency response or an outbreak response might be, how they were going to engage with their stakeholders, or even how they were going to engage internally. Did they have the right governance structure to make quick decisions and pivot relatively quickly? What were their communication strategies, right? How are they going to communicate to their members? How are they going to communicate to public health? What is their level of engagement with the public health in their municipality or the province? And then something that you and the technical committee had been deeply a part of was just figuring out all the different areas of mitigation that they could apply to these things to kind of further drive down their risk. So those conversations have been very good, to be honest. I would say 95% of the feedback we've got about the tool has been incredibly positive. People have used the tool in different ways, which is perfectly fine. They've gone through the tool without having a deep plan in place. Maybe 50% of the plan is complete, but they wanted to see sort of where they were, maybe identify some further areas that they could push mitigation into their plan. And then they're going to go back and sort of reassess after the fact, just to, in many respects, to illustrate to their boards and their members that this is where they were, this is the information that they now have, and this is how they're further protecting their membership.
Yeah, that feedback loop is so important, isn't it? Because essentially clubs who are resuming programming, they don't really know what they don't know. So it's hard for them to identify areas of risk if they're not really aware of that. One of the things that we reiterated to the member associations in their return to play plans was a multi-phase approach. So we're not going from 0 to 100. Why is that important with respect to being cautious as we unroll programming and start to resume programming? Why is it important to have those multiple steps and multiple phases in place?
Well, I think, and you would know this from way more than I would, from a purely technical perspective, just going to games immediately, going to full contact, just physically isn't the right decision to make. We've been on a long break, right? We've been on a significant break for 90 days. Easing players and easing everyone in your club back to a place where they're comfortable playing again was an important step. But I think in so many ways we're dealing with unknowns, right? Even medical experts differ on the level of contagion, right? Who is going to be who's going to be sort of the biggest culprit in passing along this virus? What is the impact of asymptomatic people into this system? Like, I think there are so many unknowns that it was important for everyone to sort of walk very slowly into this to get a further understanding of what's going on. And you see it in just the way that provinces themselves have rolled things out, for the most part, right? Provinces themselves and the governments themselves have taken a very slow approach to opening up. Knowing that at any point you have the potential of going backwards, and that's certainly not what we want.
Well, I know it's been a mountain of work over the last 3 months, and we're certainly not anywhere near the end. So we'll let you go. Thanks very much for your time, for coming on and giving us a little bit of insight into the return to play protocols and the process and the assessment tool. And stay safe, be well, and I'm sure we'll be on a video call tomorrow, the next day, the day after that. So I won't be missing you very much, but we'll talk again soon, Earl. Thanks for joining us.
Anytime, Jason.
Excellent. Thanks, Earl. When we come back after the break, we will talk with Sean Rosa and David Cerasuolo from CS Monteuil in Laval, Quebec, about the work that they're doing at the grassroots level at their clubs. Stay tuned. Pleased to welcome to the Canada Soccer Nation podcast two gentlemen from CS Monteuil, the soccer club in Laval, Quebec. Sean Rosa is the executive director of the club, and David Cerasuolo is the technical director. Sean and David, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Jason. Pleasure to be here today. Hi, Jason. Thanks for the invitation.
No problem. It's great. It's great to have you here. We've met previously, David. I think you and I met when you were doing the A license back in maybe 2016. I think it was for the first
Very
time.
good memory.
I've been hitting the head by soccer balls a lot, so I forget a lot of things, but I do remember some things. So we've met previously, but we had a good interaction recently going through the club licensing program, and both Dave Nutt and myself very impressed by the work that you were doing at CS Monteuil in Quebec. But I want to start with your own personal stories, both of you, because you're both have a long history with soccer. So I'll start with you, Sean. Tell us about football, soccer, whatever it was called in your household, and what was your first introduction? What's your first childhood memory of the game?
So one of the earliest memories I have is with my grandfather. So my family actually is from Portugal and Portuguese, and my grandfather is a huge sporting fan. I mean, in his garage, posters everywhere, the old faded ones that they keep there for 30 years and they disappear. So, he sort of got me into the game a little bit. And I have an older brother too, and he was very active. He was a very good soccer player as well. So I just sort of got into it, playing in the alley, playing in the streets, joined my first club maybe around 9-10 years old. And, it sort of took off from there. I did the traditional player pathway in the province, the regional team, provincial team. And around the age of 15, first invitation for the national team. So I spent probably about, 8 years from around U15 up until the U23s, traveling, doing all the camps, going through that process, meeting a lot of different coaches. And then, it's incredible now when I think about it, all the experiences and how much older I've gotten, but, and then, even while playing soccer, I was lucky enough to spend 2-3 years abroad in Europe, in Portugal and France. Actually, one of the funniest memories I have is, I spent a bit of time in Benfica, and my grandfather almost having a heart attack being a sporting fan. So that was a big shock. But
did he let you come back into the house after that?
He there was some adjusting until, he realized that just the fact that I was there was, he was proud. And after he was on board, but, then, I had a decision to make whether I wanted to pursue an education and, or take the risk and the gamble. So, I was always very good in school and I enjoyed it. So I decided to go back to the States. I had some really good opportunities in some of the best schools in the world that theoretically just couldn't turn down. So I was very fortunate enough to go to Brown, and continue my playing career there. Mm-hmm. I was able to receive a degree in economics, which is definitely helpful now to this day. And, I stayed in the States a couple of years, kept playing. And now once I remember when I came back, it was in between a summer, so on and so forth. And the then technical director was Marco, and he proposed a plan to me. And I got on board and never looked back.
Yeah. You played for the national youth teams, U15, 16, 18, U20. You had some good coaches through that period of time. Tell me a little bit about who you played for on the national youth teams through those periods.
So my first coach was actually Stephen Hart. Mm-hmm. And I can still remember some of the jokes and some of the things he used to say on the field. And so, he was sort of the introduction to the national team process. Yeah. And then, coaches like Dave Benning came around in and out. Ray Clark was there a couple of times. And then, when I was making the jump to the U20s, there was Dale Mitchell. Dale Mitchell was heavily involved at the club at the time. So I was actually spent 2-3 years around that time with Dale, right around when Canada actually was hosting the U20 World Cup in Canada. So it was pretty exciting time. Right around that time, I think it was 2007, was it? So this was about 13 years ago. So that was really exciting time. And then, then Ray Clark came in. So, I was very fortunate enough to have a lot of coaches that actually coached the senior team. I think at one point, I think Steven was there. I think Dale made his way up there too. Yep. I forgot his name now. He was with us with the U20s. Portuguese. He actually played at Benfica. What was his name? Tony Fonseca. I actually spoke to him. Yeah. Tony Fonseca. There you go. Yeah. So the first time he had come over, he was, I think one of his first camps was with us in Florida. So I really enjoyed that experience, him being, a Portuguese guy playing in, Portugal. So, I was fortunate enough to have a lot of good coaches with a lot of experience. And, sometimes I find myself reflecting on those days and just wishing that I could remember more about those times.
I know the games, they all blend into one, and the camps, they all blend into one. So it's amazing though, when you look back on the records and you see a list of names of players and coaches who participated in the, late 90s, early 2000s. And you look now at where many of those people are in the soccer community from coast to coast, you realize what a big impact those coaches had on a wide range of players over the years. So kudos to you for going back into the grassroots system. And we'll talk about that in a second. But I want to ask the same question to David. Your first memories of soccer, what were they, and how did you fall in love with the game?
Well, if I'm being honest, I think that I need to tell the story that when I was a kid, I didn't really want to play soccer. And my mom kind of said, it's something that, I want you to try. And basically, let's just say, she kind of, I'm not going to say forced, but she strongly encouraged me to go to my first game.
Yeah.
And I loved it. I fell head over heels. And let's say at 5:00 on one night, I didn't want to have anything to do with soccer. And then by 7:00 at the end of my first game, it's been my life ever since. So I think a bit of thanks there definitely goes out to my mom and my dad for that kind of parental support. But yeah, I think one thing that for me in my case, Monteuil, this is my boyhood club, right? This is actually where I started playing soccer. This is where I fell in love with the game. So I definitely have a very special attachment to the club, a special connection. And that's something that, we try to transmit to our current members, our current players. So after that, I started my youth career there, like Sean, probably around U8, U9 it was. Went through regional teams, provincial teams, played for Laval Conquérant, which was our AAA team, Lac St. Louis Lakers as well. So, my playing CV is not as extensive as Sean's, but I kind of did that pathway, our pathway. I had a knee injury when I was 17, 18, ACL, so it took a little bit of time to recover. Mm-hmm. And eventually I ended up following the same path and kind of going to university. And I went to Concordia University, got my degree in management, minor in accounting, all the while playing for the university team. So I played varsity. And I was the captain of the team from 2008 to 2010. And during that time while I was at university, that's when I really, obviously you're studying, you're playing, so that takes up a lot of hours, but I was also really delving into and starting to get really committed into coaching. Mm-hmm. So that was my job. That was the kind of part-time work I had while I was at university. And again, at that time in my life, while I was at Concordia playing, I was at Monteuil coaching, right? Because I also got my coaching start at this club. So went from there, continued at the club as an assistant technical director till about 2012. From then went on to become a technical director at another club in the city, on the island, Delta. Mm-hmm. And had a little experience, a little foray in Ontario with the London Whitecaps, and I've been back at the club, Monteuil, since 2017. So that's, in a nutshell, that's kind of been my pathway.
It's interesting because when you travel around the world and you talk to people from different countries, you see how powerful the club is as a social hub in a community. And you mentioned it there, that this is your boyhood club that you're now leading as a technical director. We don't see that much in Canada, but I've always felt that that's a very powerful thing, that a club can be the central focus of a social community within an area. So talk a little bit about that, the history of the club. You both talked about your playing days and your history there, but what about the club itself? Where did the club start? How did the club start? And where did you join in that journey? Sean, we'll start with you.
This was actually my 6th year.
54th birthday.
Yeah, this is actually my 6th year at the club now. So it's definitely been a long road to where we are now, but we can still see there's still a lot of work to do. But just adding a comment on what you said, Jason, it's we've always tried to create that community feel where, you know, our members and can come and they can watch teams, they can support each other without feeling the need to only have to, you know what, I'm going to go watch my daughter instead of, you know, who's on the field tonight. And we've noticed a trend in, you know, year 3, year 4, where if we would send out, for example, an email saying, you know what, there's an interesting game if you guys are interested, and we see a couple of 100 people coming and support the club. So that's fantastic for us. Absolutely. You know, it was about 5-6 years ago where the club made a turn and decided, you know what, we're going to invest heavily in the grassroots soccer, and we're going to start, you know, building a foundation for the future. And year after year, you know, there was some struggles at the beginning. You know, some people weren't used to how things were working and whatnot. But, you know, eventually we got to a point where there was faith in the staff and in the direction of the club. And, you know, we started to qualify some teams at the AAA, and we were able to slowly implement, you know, some new projects that we have, you know, like the University Showcase, things like that. And, you know, we've just been moving on. And now with the licensing process is something that's really allowed us to, you know, look back on the past 5 years and see, okay, so how was that beneficial to us? What can we change? What can we modify? And how can we just, you know, move forward for our members and for, you know, the betterment of soccer across Canada?
David, what about you in terms of your journey back to the club as a technical director? Obviously, you'd been there from a very young age as a player, but you know, what did you see about the club that attracted you to that role and made you want to come back?
Well, I think that if I look back at my first stint while I was coaching at the club, it was right around the time where in Quebec there was a reform, and there was really a heavy emphasis placed on making sure that clubs got organized from a technical perspective. It was the first time we were really seeing full-time technical directors in the club context, right? So that was happening around that time, 2008, 2009. And when I came back in 2017, I mean, obviously, like I mentioned, there's the connection to the club itself. There's the connection to the community. There's a connection to the people that worked at the club. So many faces that I knew, so many friends. So that was all part of it. But I kind of had seen, and we were already hearing about where soccer was trending. And I was like, I think this is going to be a really good place to take the club to a next step, right? And make sure that, you know, we were going to be able to push the envelope a little bit more, right? And luckily we have a very supportive membership. We have really committed volunteers and a great board of directors that really give us that support. So kind of when this was presented to me in 2017, it wasn't too difficult to make the decision. I was really excited about just, you know, grabbing the bull by the horns and let's see what we can add to it, right? Let's see how I can help, and let's all go forward together. And honestly, it's been, I mean, Sean's been here since probably 2013. I came back 2017. There's other key staff people, Anthony Cornelli, Adam Bavlis, that have been here over the last few years, more than a few years. And it's just great to interact with these people and bring the project forward.
Yeah, it's interesting. I say this to technical directors when they're seeking advice on whether they should join a club or not join a club or apply for a job, that type of thing. I always say to them, think very carefully about the people you're going to be working with every day. Think about who the executive director or the general manager or whoever the lead administrator is. You're going to have a strong working relationship with that person. Think about who the board members are at this present time. Think about the history of the club in terms of the board involvement. Are they people that you feel you can work with? And that's a key aspect, I think, for every technical director in succeeding in his or her role. How important is the relationship that you have with Sean, David, that your working relationship on an ongoing basis day to day?
I would say, like, you know, and I don't want to throw him flowers, but we're pretty blessed, the scenario we have, the situation. And I think for the simple reason where we have a lot of compatibility, we have different strengths, so we complement each other well. But at the base, it's, I mean, you heard Sean and his background. So it's a high level playing background. He understands the game. So when we're talking programming, when we're talking coaching development, when we're talking anything regarding the game, yes, there's that. We both have that business side, right? Because of the education that, the degrees that we have. But I know that when I'm talking to him, he definitely understands the technical importance. So they're much easier discussions to have. They're challenging in different ways, but right from the get-go, like I said, you're speaking to someone who clearly understands the direction things need to trend in.
You talk about challenges. I think the entire country, the entire world right now is dealing with an incredible challenge that none of us expected to come along, which is a global pandemic. How has the club managed to stay connected over the last 3 months with its players, its coaches, volunteers, parents during the suspension of soccer due to COVID-19?
So it's definitely been an unprecedented situation. And I mean, I was actually thinking about it today. It's already been 3 months that this has been going on. It's it feels like it's been a year, but when you look back, I remember at the early stages, right around it was right around March 12th and March 13th, before actually our government had limited us and told us we had to sort of put the pause. I remember speaking to David that week, and I said, David, what are we going to do? I said, because, we can't be ignorant and pretend like it may eventually not, hit our shores or hit, the region of Laval and Montreal, or even the sport that we love. And believe it or not, maybe I jinxed it, maybe I didn't, but the next day it just took off like wildfire. And from the morning to the afternoon, every hour, 30 minutes, there was just an announcement after announcement and restriction after restriction. So, we pulled the plug there, and we decided not to rush into things too quickly, because the reality is we didn't know the scope of this thing either, right? We didn't know, is it just temporary? Is this something that's going to last? So we really took, I would say, a week, 2 weeks to sort of let's let everything get aligned in terms of the government, in terms of our federation, maybe even Canada Soccer to a certain extent, and see, what kind of directives they're starting to send out. And, it was once we started to realize that, okay, now we're in a situation where our members are starting to panic a little bit. Us as human beings were a little afraid of what's coming. So how can we give back to our kids? And it was actually, I remember, browsing through social media and browsing around and seeing what other organizations and other, industries were doing. Like, for example, yoga, how were they adapting? And it started to be, they're offering live sessions, they're doing things live. And, a couple of other clubs had started before us, sending out some videos for their members. But I remember we wanted to create something more interactive than just, here's a 3-minute clip, let's post it online. Because like we mentioned before, that community feel, that feeling of we're there with you. So, I came up with the idea of let's do live sessions virtually. And I remember speaking with Emily Duquette, our operations manager, and she was saying, how are we going to do this? And then the next day she called me and she said, it's actually a fantastic idea. Let's do it. So, we sort of went in the unknown a little bit, and we started doing these live sessions through Facebook. And believe it or not, I mean, the support was incredible. I think, the parents really and our members really appreciated that interaction, that, I'm there. If they leave a comment, hey, I'm responding, or I'm, making a joke to their daughter or their son. So it was really a success on our end. And we were very happy with how things trended there. And we were actually able to maintain this for about 2 months, going 3 times a week. And I spearheaded the project, being that I, had really, was comfortable on the ball and doing things, in my garage. So, I spearheaded this project, and we're just happy that the members were so supportive. I mean, even now I get emails of parents thanking myself, thanking David, for putting these things in place. It meant a lot to their kids, just waking up on a Monday morning, having no school, no nothing, but being able to look forward to that session in the afternoon, really, it really helped them get through the week.
What type of feedback have you received from the parents about the kids and what they've missed about soccer? Have you had conversations with parents, David, about that?
Yeah, I think that after, like Sean said, after the first few weeks, and you realize that this was something that was going to stick around, well, then we kind of went into full swing. And on my end, touching base a lot with the coaches, you mentioned parents, made a few phone calls to certain parents just to kind of get a feel, trying to get a pulse for like, what are things like, what are the kids dealing with in terms of a school workload, or maybe they don't have. And I think that the thing that kept popping up was just the interaction. It was the interaction. It was the fact of, the kids realizing, yeah, of course they missed the sport, they missed playing, but they just missed coming to the field, being with their teammates, their friends, being with their coaches, being in that community club, that feeling, right? So, and to credit to Sean and Emily, because I think the project was fantastic, right? And we did get a good response from players, from parents, saying that it helped. It's never like being in person, but it was the next best thing. I can tell you that from a perspective of, we also started thinking, okay, well, let's look at this as an opportunity, right? So we have this opportunity to keep training our players. Yeah, it's not in the circumstances that we would ideally want, but still something. We can still do something for them. And I also, really spent a lot of time with the coaches. I figured it was a great opportunity, probably one that I wouldn't have in the near future, having to deal with the restart, to kind of just touch base and more seminars, more talks, more informal chats, going over our coaching development plans. It was just, everybody became so accustomed to using video call software, right? Video conferencing, Zoom, whatever it is, Skype. And, so that's something that also opened our eyes to say, going forward, there are possibilities or opportunities to do things differently. And I think that's probably one of the biggest takeaways we have from this pandemic, is that, we can do things better with use of technology, where in the past we were kind of, maybe just out of habit, used to just doing things always in person. If we're going to meet, we're going to meet in person. If we're going to have a training session, we're going to do it in person. But this has kind of expanded our mind to think about different ways that we can offer services to our members. And I think that's probably one of the biggest takeaways.
Yeah, it's a great learning that I think we can all take from over the last 3 months, which is the crisis presents an opportunity, and it's really about how you shape it and how you embrace the opportunity. And it's great to see clubs like yourselves embracing technology, using technology. One of the things you talked about there, you just touched on it briefly, was coach development. It's one of the things I was really impressed with when we spoke with you through the club licensing program, was your documented coach development program. Talk a little bit about that and why that's an important component of what you're trying to do at the club.
Well, I think that for obvious reasons, the coaches, the people that are interacting, are the people that are interacting and intervening with our players. And everything that we do needs to be centered on the player. So you want to make sure that the coaches are in the best conditions possible and have the most tools at their disposition, to offer the players the best environment possible. I think that's the easy answer. Mm-hmm. But what I've always felt, that to have a strong club, to really be able to build on something, and I alluded to it, you need to have those committed volunteers, those committed coaches. And I feel that this is one way that the club, we can really show how much we're willing to go the extra mile and invest in our coaches. Because I love it. It's you spend time talking with them about their objectives, how they want to better themselves, things that they want to take an interest and learn. So they really feel that, you're taking the time to invest in them. And that kind of helps them build that bond beyond just, I like to coach this little group of players. They start to feel like, well, I'm part of a community here. I'm part of a club. I contribute. I have colleagues. We exchange. We discuss. It's fun, right? And I think that's something that I think we all relate to as passionate people involved in the game. And I think that that's something that's so common to the Canadian coach, is that they're really passionate people, right? Because they don't get paid tons and tons of money to do it. They do it because they genuinely love it. They love being in the environment. So I feel like this is just one of the best ways to kind of encourage them, support them, in helping them realize, their own development plans.
It gives them a voice, and they feel valued. And I think that's a key piece of what we've learned over the last 3 months dealing with the coronavirus and the suspension of soccer is people are missing that community and that sense of interaction. It's starting to come back, though. We're starting to see now across the country resuming programming and a return to play. Talk a little bit, Sean, about some of the steps that you're taking as a club as you resume the gradual reintroduction of training sessions and games. What are some of the steps that you're taking as a club to safeguard players?
Well, the most important thing has always been the retention of the membership, right? And we understand that each family, may be in a different situation, whether it be, loss of job, living with grandparents and parents, people that are, vulnerable for XYZ reason. So we really had to abort this with, we may have to be flexible in our approach. We may have to be flexible in our approach and understanding and just try to be there for, the parents and the players. And, it's probably about a month and a half we've been working on the safety protocols, and they've been pretty rigorous, and our federation has been pretty solid with guiding us and sending us in that direction. But essentially us as a club, it's just been to give the clearest amount of information to the parents about what's going on and what's to come. And to be honest, this is probably the first time that I myself, probably any of us, have ever had to live through something like this. So, a lot of it was being able to just adjust on the day-to-day and just let our parents know that we don't have all the answers for them, but we're going to do our best to make sure that we can get them the information as quickly as possible and create that safe environment. Now, for example, a couple of days ago, I was actually yesterday morning, they announced the starting of games, which is, a fantastic news. But I remember myself and David were speaking that we still want to make sure that just because, we're allowed contact, it doesn't mean that every safety measure goes out the window, right? Mm-hmm. The first thing, that first contact when that parent shows up to the field, whether it be a parent that's bringing their child for the first time, U4, U5, U6, where the child is discovering this environment for the first time. So that first interaction is extremely important. Or somebody else that's been in the club for 3-4 years knows us well, and it's sort of like, okay, I'm searching for that sense of reassurance. Okay, everything is going to be fine. So I think that's going to be a big part of it. I mean, we've scheduled a couple of dress rehearsals with our coaching staff where we're going to take them all through the protocol so that everybody's on the same page. We've developed, and David has developed a couple of documents where, the field maps are outlined, all the sanitary restrictions are there. So we've really been, working with our educators. Our educators are young ones, even some of our coaches, to, brief their teams on as much as possible. And, as a club, we've just been trying to take as much information as possible, dissect the important parts and really do, as much as we can to just make sure that the parent and the child feel comfortable and, they can resume, the sport that they love so much.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think you hit on some really important topics there. Just fluidity, being fluid, being adaptable to changing circumstances. We've all had to do that, I think, over the last 3 months. And I think that's going to be equally important as organizations across the country begin the resumption of programming. It might not look the way it used to look. It might not look that way for quite some time. We just don't know, but we need to be fluid. And the other piece too is taking all of the appropriate steps to make sure that everyone is safe. I think that's the priority that has to be on the plate for everyone, that the health and well-being of everyone involved is imperative, and those steps need to be taken to ensure that you can create a safe environment for kids to get back to playing soccer and enjoying the game, but also for parents to feel comfortable that their children are going to be safe and their extended families are going to be safe because they're coming into contact with other people. I wanted to switch topics a little bit here and talk a little bit about your experience so far in the club licensing program. We see a changing landscape at the grassroots level. Obviously now Canada Soccer working very closely with its provincial territorial member associations on supporting clubs and helping them improve their programming and get better. And that means that the landscape is changing. What's that experience been like like for you as a club so far? And where do you see the game going in Quebec and in Canada in future years?
I mean, I don't mind starting off. David, you can chime in after and, your own opinions. But, I often compare Jason now to, when I was a kid and when I was going through this process and just seeing in a short period of time how everything has been able to change in the sense of the technological side of it, the supervision, where everything is going. And it's fantastic, right? To see that sort of investment, in the grassroots level. And it really shows the determination as a country, to really, let's do something. Let's all hop on board. And, there really is a sense of we want to change things for the better. So, just for me on that personal, it's fantastic to see. But, just in terms of the structure and surrounding it, surrounding those young athletes with, the right tools and the right mindsets to be able to just, enjoy the game. Because we often forget the most important thing, that it is a game, right? It is a game, and you can have the most talented players at 5, 6, 7 years old that if they don't enjoy coming to the field and playing, well, they just won't do it. Right? To touch upon something like David said. So, with this whole new structure and investing in grassroots soccer so that, the message is right, and it's a unified message across the country that, let's have some fun. Let's create environments that are appropriate for our athletes. Let's, invest in the right ways, in the proper, coaches, certified coaches, things like that. And it was in one of the coaching courses that I had taken out too long ago. I think it was the children's license, where they were talking about the percentages of kids that quit sports before the age of 12. And it was completely, it really hit me hard there. And, it really sort of, I believe me and David had this discussion too, was, we got to make sure that the kids enjoy their experience. It doesn't matter how old. And even sometimes at the older ages, we forget that it is a game, and, we want to win at the older, more competitive levels. That's fine. But nobody's going to do something for an extended period of time that they don't enjoy. That's, that's for sure. So, investing and uniting the country, with certain principles, and this whole process has certainly been enlightening. And, I often think, wow, I wonder if I was growing up in this system today, how things would have been different, or, where would I fit in? And so it's definitely, I've really enjoyed the process up until now.
David, your thoughts?
Yeah. So I think that one of the things I enjoyed most about going through the club licensing process, or rather still going through it, is that, we all have ways of doing things, procedures. We have presentations we've prepared for our members, our coaches, our parents, our players, just all this documentation. And it was kind of that gentle kick in the butt that kind of allowed us to take a step back and synthesize everything and say, okay, where are we? This is all good stuff, but how does it come together? How do we harmonize our approach? And I thought that was one of the most important parts of the exercise, because we went through all the stuff we had, all the documentation, all the literature, all the documents we were using for our programming, and again, just made it more clear. So it's that clarity. So I think that that's going to be huge for us going forward. And I think that just the other thing that I think is really helpful, the word that comes to me is alignment. We talk about grassroots soccer, and in the past, and we've all lived through this. I've talked to colleagues in different provinces. We've all lived through this, where we know that the approach we had maybe up to a few years ago, it wasn't ideal, but there were administrative restrictions with the way the leagues were run. You couldn't have an open roster, limitations that, went against, principles that we wanted to implement, regarding LTPD. So to finally see it come and be aligned through the new club licensing program, I think it's huge for every club, and by extension, just Canadian soccer. I think we're headed in the right direction. It's gonna still take a bit of time, but we're working with solid foundations, and I think that for me is something that I really value at this time.
Some good points there. What I take away from this conversation and others that we've had with other clubs is the importance of identity, of clubs knowing who they are and why they're there, why they exist. And they're essentially there to exist in service of the community they operate in. And I think that's a massively important piece that's misunderstood. It isn't about the level that you're playing at, the level that your club is evaluated at. Our role is to help every organization fulfill its potential and fulfill its dreams, but ultimately help every organization deliver fun, enjoyable, accessible, inclusive, developmentally appropriate programs so that kids can fall in love with the game. And that's the big thing. I think you mentioned it, Sean. Kids don't do things they don't love to do. And our trick shot for all of us at the grassroots level is to make sure that kids fall in love with soccer. So they'll keep coming back for more, and they'll want to keep playing, and they'll want to put the time in to get better and to improve. So I think that's a really important aspect. Final words. I'll give you guys a chance just to wrap things up. Is there anything that we've missed that you'd like to mention that you're doing at your club and that you want to promote? Sean, we'll go to you first, and then David.
Okay, I just want to start off by, thanking you, Jason, for having us here and, giving us the opportunity to talk about the process and everything we've been going through. Just as a club, like David mentioned before, it's really given us an opportunity to look within ourselves and, align our approach and align everything. But essentially, we're thankful to be in a club that, where our CA pushes us to be the best that we can possibly be. And, all the way through, we pretty much touched upon a lot of different things, but we're just happy to be there for our members, giving them the best possible service, regardless of whether it be U4 to U6 or to the older ages. We want to make them feel comfortable being with us. And especially now with everything that's been going on, we're extremely dedicated to making sure that our members feel comfortable, to feel comfortable to come back with us. But once again, this process has been difficult at times with a lot of work to a lot of paperwork to go through. But it's definitely, with no growing pains in the sense that, it's helped us guide the next few months. So now we know what's to come, and we've been able to clean up a lot of different things, and it's definitely been beneficial. So we look forward to the future and what it holds, and we're definitely going to keep on just being the best that we can be, to serve everybody above us, the federations, the national teams. I was fortunate enough to put on the jersey, and I tell my players this many times, and we sort of say this as coaches secretly, but if of course everybody wants to win, but if we can have a player or two within our club, put on the jersey of the national team, then that's just an honor in itself, right? At the end of the day, we're here to form athletes. And especially for me, if I, having one of my players put on a jersey that I was able to put on, 15 years ago, then that's just an honor for me to have helped in that path. So for me, that's pretty much it.
Yeah, no, Jason, I'd like to just maybe take the opportunity to mention one of the interesting projects, and it's relatively new in the club. It was started last year. Is our showcase, right? Our university showcase, and I'll give you a bit of background. Marco Masucci was here in the past, and he helped. We were all involved in getting this showcase off the ground, and the idea behind it was really simple. We knew that we were getting into a point where, because we had invested heavily into our grassroots soccer, slowly we're starting to get some really good players coming through the older ages. And we said, not everybody goes on to be a professional. Not everybody goes on, to wear the national team jersey. But we knew that university, right, was something that was really important, that academics and soccer, and we had all lived that. Sean and me have that experience, having played at university, having had the experience of going to school, continuing to play at quite a high level, and all the benefits that come with it. And we said, that's definitely something that we want to incorporate into our service offering for our players, right? So again, it gives them other opportunities. Maybe an opportunity to go to the US and live something different, maybe to go to another Canadian province and live a different experience, right? Grow as a person. So we kind of got that started last year. Last year was I must say it was a resounding success for year one. We had tons of coaches. I don't know the number now. I'm going to say around 30, 40 from the US that came, also Canadian university coaches, spent a few days with us, And IDing our players, seeing them through 11v11 games, functional sessions, small-sided stuff. And it was great. The feedback we got was really positive, so much so that as of last year, when it was finished in the month of July, they had already confirmed their willingness to participate this year. For obvious reasons, this year won't be happening in its traditional sense, but it is something that we're looking to continue in the future years for both our boys and girls programs, because we feel it's a piece of the puzzle that maybe was missing, but that's so important when you think about how important academics are and how the type of experience you can have through academics and sport.
I think it's a big piece of the puzzle for a grassroots club is to help players transition to the next level of the game and to stay involved in the sport. And I think both of you are living proof of the benefits of going off to university, getting your education, maintaining your involvement in the sport, and then coming back to give back to the sport. So I want to thank both of you for taking the time. I really appreciate it, and wish you all the very best in the resumption of programming at your club at Monteuil. And if there's anything that we can do to help, please don't hesitate to let us know. But gentlemen, thank you very much for your time. Really appreciate it. Stay safe, and we'll talk again soon.
Thanks, Jason. Really appreciate it. Take care.
Thanks, Jason. Stay safe. All the best.
Perfect. After the break, we'll connect with Brad, get his thoughts and reflections on today's episode. Stay tuned. Welcome back to the Canada Soccer Nation podcast. That was Sean Rosa, Executive Director of CS Monteuil Soccer Club, and David Cerasuolo, Technical Director at CS Monteuil. Brad, what were your thoughts on that conversation? What's the key takeaway from you talking, listening in on Sean and David's conversation with me?
What a dynamic duo they have there.
Yeah.
Right? It's really fun to hear them interact with each other and to hear sort of the passion between the two of them. Very different paths. Very different people, it seems like, but a bit of a yin and yang thing there. That's really entertaining, and I'm sure very much welcomed by the families of the club there. One of the things that jumped out for me was just the challenges of COVID-19 and needing to admit that not all the answers are in place, and not all of the answers are going to be in place, and the just dynamic changes that happen. Governments make decisions, sometimes snap decisions that impact everyone, and we need to sort of roll with those punches is just a broader theme. I think the pace of change in this game is such that, we sort of need to embrace the unknown and embrace saying, there are steps that we're trying to follow, and I don't have all the answers because we haven't gone through all of the steps. That was something that, they seem to take in stride, right? Those two really seem to not enjoy it. I don't know that anyone enjoys it, but certainly embrace it and just recognize that as long as they're transparent with folks, the families in their club and the players that they're trying to develop, that this is a process, not just COVID-19, but the National Club Licensing Program and just everything that they're doing. It's sort of a breath of fresh air. Hey, just the ability to say, hey, I don't know yet. I don't have all the answers right now.
Yeah, it's the concept of just being transparent with your members and making sure that they understand that you're trying to do the best for them and for the safety of their children. And I think that that's an imperative piece of showing leadership through this process. And I think the two of them work very, very well together. You may have picked up on this. They did mention a name in there that also works at the club. Emily Duquette is someone who may be very familiar to you if you're in the soccer community in Quebec. Emily also works for the club and also works for RDS and is a very accomplished broadcaster. So, you talk about the building of a staff, a building of a community of best practice. They've got some excellent people there at the club. And I think the one thing that stood out for me was this concept of community and building a community. And, obviously David started out playing there at the club and has now gone back as a technical director. So there's a natural tie in there. But I think the best clubs that I've seen coast to coast, Brad, are ones that have that same sense of community and feel that they're not just there as a business. They're there providing a service for the members of their community. Would you agree with that?
They seem to exude it. Hey, right? At the end on the outro, we were talking there. talking about this podcast and the ability to sort of voice some of the things that he's thinking and just put this information out there. He found that, really valuable. And it's true, right? I mean, the importance of connecting people who are like-minded is vital, and that isn't necessarily always in your neighborhood, although this sense of community obviously speaks to it. But sometimes you need to connect people over longer distances, and the idea, of course, that this game does that is well entrenched, and I hope that that's what we're doing here, right? Being able to bring guests like we had today onto the show. I hope what that will accomplish is allow people who maybe don't have that type of collaborative thinker, that type of community-minded thinker, or just the person with the same lens on the game as you. They might not be there in your neighborhood, but they are there in the country, and it's a big country, and it's hard to connect people, and hopefully we're able to do that, because I definitely think there'll be some people who are in Halifax or in a small town in northern Alberta or wherever that have a level of passion that is maybe unparalleled in the people that they interact with in their community. But then they can hear these two come on and hear, wow, yeah, they're working really hard for all of the right reasons. I am too. It's nice to know that somebody else is out there.
I think one of the challenges that we face as a country is our geographic size. I mean, just the scale and scope of Canada is enormous. And what that can lead to is a bit of a myopic view of the world, because we only ever really see what's going on in our own backyard. And I think the beauty of sharing stories like Monteuil's is that they're doing some excellent work, and now clubs in other parts of the country can get access to that and can listen to their story and how they're doing things and how they're going about it, and share those best practices. I mean, they have, in my mind, one of the best coach development plans at the club level that I've ever seen, and they do a phenomenal job there. So that's a resource that other clubs can use and can hopefully share and spread best practice across the country. So I think that's a really important aspect of making our country smaller. I mean, our one of our greatest challenges is also one of our greatest strengths is the size, and we can now make that a lot smaller, and we can benefit from the huge diversity that we love about being Canadian by sharing some of these stories coast to coast. So keep up the great work, folks at CS Monteuil, and we'll look forward to checking in with you again in the future. As always, if you have any questions or comments, concerns, or suggestions for podcast guests, please email us at podcast@canadasoccer.com, and we will certainly add them to the growing list of people that we have being recommended to us as guests on the podcast. As always, thank you for listening. Thank you for joining us. Stay safe, look after each other, be well, and we'll talk to you next week. Take care.